Hello Weirdos, I am so excited to share this best list ever with you, coming up right after this.
When it comes to building tough, dependable cars at America's most affordable prices, Yugo leads the way. Others are trying to follow but can't match Yugo's reliability for the price.
If you live in North America and somebody says, what's the worst car ever? You're probably gonna think Yugo. From 1987 to 1992, over 141,000 Yugos found new homes in the USA. It was all the brainchild of Malcolm Bricklin, who was looking for a repeat of the success he had in 1968, founding Subaru of America, importing tiny cheap cars that nobody had ever heard of. In between those two startups, he had to go at making his own car named after himself. It was a sports car with gull wing doors that didn't sell well. Kind of a popular idea in the old days. But unlike that other guy you're thinking of, Bricklin never got tricked by the FBI into selling cocaine. In fact, Bricklin sold his interest in Yugo early in the game for $20 million. And you know, the car wasn't that bad considering its roots. Yugo, whose real company name is Zastava, bought the rights to produce the Fiat 127, which was a car designed in the late 1960s. When Yugoslavia disintegrated in 1991, so did Yugo. By the way, they weren't alone in the cheap car genre back then. They held the record at $39.95 for a new car, but for $1,000 more, you could buy a different new car from another company nobody'd heard of, Hyundai. Welcome to the best list ever, brought to you every Thursday-ish by Legion of Weirdos. This might post after midnight. This week, 10 automotive frauds and failures. By the way, if you have a suggestion for a future list, leave it in the comment section below. While you're at it, if you could click subscribe and then tag that little bell notification icon, you can make sure you don't miss videos like this in the future. Next on the list, since I already hinted at it, the DeLorean, made from 1981 to 1983. Actually, most of them were made in October of 1981. Way back before starting his own company, John DeLorean was the brains behind the Pontiac GTO. By the way, his car, the DMC-12, was a failure, but it's coming back this year. So maybe it was just marketed at the wrong time. Nah, it was also an underpowered turd. DeLorean had plans for a much better motor to come out in the 1984 model year, but by then the car already had a bad rep and was a sales failure. But what about Bricklin's DeLorean? Predating the DMC-12 by 7 years, the Bricklin SV1 hit 0 to 60 miles an hour in 9.9 seconds. Corvettes of that era took more than 8 seconds, and the Porsche 911 took 7.4. Bricklin's selling point wasn't speed though, it was safety. A weird feature for its day was its exclusion of a cigarette lighter in an ashtray. Smoking isn't safe. The real problem was quality control. The doors wouldn't stay up, and if your battery died, you couldn't open them at all because they were all electric. The headlights didn't pop open like they should. But worst of all, to make the body, Bricklin laminated an acrylic coating on the fiberglass panels. And no company had succeeded in doing that up to those days, including Bricklin. In warmer states like Arizona, when it got hot outside, the body panels would warp because acrylic and fiberglass expand and contract at different rates. While we're talking about rich guys failing at sports cars, let's talk about Heinrich Fisker. Like DeLorean and Bricklin, Fisker had already seen some success in the automotive industry. He was the guy behind the designs of the BMW Z8 and the Aston Martin Vantage and DB9. In 2007, he founded Fisker Automotive to build luxury electric sedans. When it went on the market, the Fisker Karma beat Tesla to the punch by a year. There was also an ugly lawsuit between the two companies, but that's a whole different video. The Karma looked more exotic than the Tesla, more like a supercar, and also had this really cool solar panel roof. And it had quality problems galore. When Consumer Reports tried to review the car, the one they bought broke down completely before they could even start testing. In 2 instances, Fisker Karmas were involved in garage fires, which the company insisted was not the car's fault. But then, Hurricane Katrina. Ironically, while submerged in floodwaters at Point Newark, New Jersey, 16 Fisker Karmas died of spontaneous combustion. Actually, the whole shipment of 338 cars was destroyed by the storm. Between the capital loss and the loss of reputation, the company was down for the count. Rounding out the dreamers who couldn't get off the ground, we got Preston Tucker and his Tucker 48. A lot of people call it the Torpedo, but that was actually the name of the concept car. The Tucker 48 had a pop-out style shatterproof windshield for crash safety. The car's controls, including the radio, were all mounted on the steering column. Tucker planned to put seat belts in the cars, but the engineers talked him out of it, saying that it would give the impression the cars were unsafe. The Tucker 48 was ahead of its time. Unfortunately, Tucker was having money problems. He didn't have the funds to put it into production, and the Securities and Exchange Commission accused Tucker of fraud. They asserted that he'd never intended to build the cars and he just used the money personally. He was indicted on 28 counts in 1949, but the jury found him not guilty on all of them in 1950. But by then, his reputation was trashed. Ironically, the U.S. attorney who pursued him the most, Otto Kerner Jr., was convicted on 17 counts of bribery, conspiracy, perjury, and stock fraud in 1974, and he was the first U.S. appellate judge ever to be jailed. But do you know who really committed fraud? Geraldine Elizabeth Carmichael and Jerry Dean Michael. Those were the same person, by the way. In our modern times, you'd say, oh, a transsexual. How far into transition? Not really clear, though, whether Jerry was really becoming Geraldine or if it was all a ruse. You see, he was living as both people at the same time. And I know you're thinking, well, you know, back in those days, not everybody understood, and so... But he also used these aliases: Jerry Barrett, Mike Morgan, Mike Moran, William Tracy Parker, William Richard Raines, and Catherine Elizabeth Johnson. Since the main names are Geraldine and Jerry, I'm just going to use Jerry for convenience. In 1974, Jerry, who was already wanted on a 1961 counterfeiting charge, founded 20th Century Motor Car. That was meant to produce this three-wheeled automotive wonder called the Dale. The car supposedly only weighed 1,000 pounds, but could absorb up to 4 times the force of a Cadillac without damage. And supposedly it would take a bullet to break the windows because they were made out of Rigidex, which is weird because Rigidex is generally opaque. Supposedly there were no wires in the whole car. Everything operated off a printed circuit board. This doesn't even make sense. It was supposed to have a BMW-sourced flat twin engine, and it was supposed to get 75 miles to the gallon and cost less than $2,000. And there was a mock-up of the car in the office to prove it was the real deal. He had it well roped off so nobody would damage the car that could absorb up to 4 times the force of a Cadillac. Or maybe it's so they wouldn't notice there was no engine and the front wheels were bolted to a 2x4. There was one other prototype built, and it had the motor out of a portable generator. Jerry claimed to have driven one of the cars into a concrete wall at 30 miles an hour, sustaining no damage. The problem was neither prototype was capable of 30 miles an hour. Jerry was arrested in 1975 and convicted of fraud, but escaped before sentencing. After being featured on America's Most Wanted in 1989, Jerry was caught in a small Texas town called Dale. In a story that feels like fraud, but actually isn't, we have the Aston Martin Cygnet. The Cygnet was the company's first foray into the subcompact market. It was a 2-seat city car that got about 59 miles to the gallon out of a 97 horsepower inline 4-cylinder motor. It sold for 30,000 pounds, which is about 39,000 US dollars. They planned to sell 4,000 of them a year, but they actually only sold 300 in total. The biggest problem? The car was a rebadged Toyota Scion IQ. Literally rebadged and rebranded. Same mechanicals, same motor. Okay, so the Cygnet had a leather interior. In Toyota clothing, the car sold for 12,300 pounds, which is about 16,000 US dollars. So basically a different grille, some Aston Martin badges, and leather interior costs about $23,000. Back to 3-wheeled cars, there's the Aptera. The company was started in 2006 by Stephen Fambro with $100,000 of his own cash. And then he raised another $24 million from companies like Idealab and Google. There was to be an electric version and a gasoline version of the car, and the gasoline version was to get 330 miles to the gallon. The company had all kinds of management problems and basically fell apart before it even got off the ground. But the COO did have one of the cars built just to prove they weren't full of crap. But in testing, it turned out the car was only able to achieve 230 miles a gallon. Yeah. 230 miles a gallon, and nobody figured out how to get it built. In 2012, a Chinese company called Johnway bought all the rights and the intellectual property with the intention of releasing the car themselves. From looking at their website, it doesn't seem like that's happened yet. Speaking of Chinese cars, there's the Kota. They built a decently equipped all-electric sedan with an 88-mile range that sold in 2012 and 2013. The problems? Well, first of all, it performed horribly in crash tests. That didn't really matter because nobody knew it existed in the first place. Plus, a company nobody knows selling an electric car for $40,000 is going to have a really hard time competing with Nissan, who was already producing their own all-electric sedan for $5,000 less. Last but not least, we have Think Global, who for a while was Ford Think. This was an electric car company based in Oslo, Norway, where pretty much everything is electric. Okay, that's a little hyperbolic, but the Tesla Model S holds the records for the most units sold in a month of any car ever in the whole country. The top 3 selling cars there are the Nissan Leaf, the Tesla Model S, and the Volkswagen e-Golf. You'd think Norway's own brand of EV would thrive, right? Not so much, but maybe it was ahead of its time. The company started in 1991, and by the time they had all the bugs worked out and were ready for production in 1999, they had no money to make cars. Then, Ford acquired Think, started to produce the cars, and distributed them in 2001 to California government agencies in a program called Electric Vehicle Demonstration Program Project. I'm sure a whole bunch of people sat around a conference table and spent hours coming up with that name. In fact, I think I'm 100% sure that's how the state of California works. I've been in meetings like that, working for the state of California. But California's emission laws were relaxed in 2003, and Ford gave up thinking about it. See what I did there? 1,005 cars had been produced by then. Ford sold Think to Camcorp, an Indian company, and in 2006 another Norwegian company bought it from them. They went into production again in 2008, but after about 100 cars were built, they sent everybody home and cited urgent financial distress. In 2009, they got a bunch of money from a battery supplier, and by 2010 it looked like they were really gonna make it. They even built a factory in Indiana for US-built Thinks. They made 15 of those. And by March 2011, production stopped and the company filed for bankruptcy. Thanks for watching. We're here 5 times a week now. Tomorrow is the premiere of the weekly wrap-up video. Meant to do one last week, but on the screen's another video YouTube thinks you'll like, plus a video from another Legion of Weirdos channel. Until next time, stay weird and stay out of the comfort zones.